and this other thing, that would also get us another 15%, whatever. So sometime in the next year, right, it's a pretty long-term focus to get a paper written. I want to move ahead with that, but I also want to bring in people like Rob and Mark and other people from other DOE labs to look at that document and make some suggestions, or at least review it some to say, no, yes, here's another thing, kind of input. So just kind of a heads up and a thought to consider and discuss. I know that, Rob, I know you had done a bunch of POSIX extensions 10 years ago, right? Which unfortunately didn't go anywhere, but there's still some of the ones I point at with people and say, hey, you know, we could really use something like this that was official.
Some of the capabilities, whether they're inspired by that or not, are around in the kernel at this point. But
good. Okay. All right. Well, I'll, you know, sometime, maybe not over the summer. There's too many people scattered in and out. But sometime in the next 4 months or so, I'll try to pull together a working group that we can kind of reach consensus about who should be in this and who can help, and start to try to pull together a document that describes that.
okay.
So we have question for Mark, right, John?
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure if it's appropriate for this meeting, but we can certainly ask. Mark, you were interested in setting or having a method of setting defaults for property lists. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I wanted to. If I have a lot of code, pre-existing code that's doing a lot of data set creation, for example, and all of a sudden I want all those data sets to have some kind of compression, being able to set what H5P default means when you pass it in there would be useful.
Okay, because for performance reasons, we're revisiting property lists. It's looking more and more like we're going to flatten the properties that we actually use into a single structure. And obviously that's a good time to think about being able to set defaults either with existing API calls, you know, set up a property list and say, yeah, make this one the default, or through a configuration file or something along that line. So just wanted to get a gauge of your level of interest in that. And I think we'll have a better feeling as we go along looking at this optimization stuff as to whether it's steamboat time for that.
Okay, yeah, of the two approaches you mentioned, I'd be far more interested in the first of the two. If it's determined at like compile configuration time, that would be far less useful.
I was thinking at runtime in a configuration file that you'd check when you open the library. I think frankly we'd wind up doing
certainly a step in the right direction, but that I think problematic to try to manage. I think because then all my customers need to be able to find that configuration. It just makes it's just an additional I to dot or a T to cross.
Yeah, I think where we ended up with Romeo was compiled in defaults plus a config file override plus environment variable overrides. So the environment variables take plus whatever runtime. So if you set something at runtime, that is what you get. If you didn't do that, but you had an environment variable, that's what you get. If you didn't do that, but you had a config file, that's what you get. And if you didn't do any of those things, then you get whatever we came up with at compile time.
That sounds cool, but also sounds really complicated.
It's really not that big a deal. And that way you end up with an ability for the facility to set defaults. And that's sort of the way we were thinking about the config file, Mark, was really something where the facility could set those defaults. and adjust those defaults.
Yeah, I could see some utility in that, I guess.
Yeah, my concern is that the users tweak around with stuff and they're dealing with layers on top of HDF5 that don't have any idea what they just did, or compiled with some other assumption. You know, so if the facility did it at install time, that probably is fine because you'd rebuild on top of that version of HDF5. But for the user to do it way down the line, who knows what middleware above HDF5 you're playing with. Just a thought.
I guess I don't understand because the user could always just pass in some MPIO and some change this stuff anytime they wanted to. So
yeah, true too. But you can't change the base default of, you know, what the parameters are to freshly created HDF5 property list. Right, that has the compile stuff built into it. And if they could all of a sudden make that look different than the middleware that was compiled, assuming some other parameters were in that property list, could get very confused.
Yeah, you could definitely break it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So the
I guess MPIO has the property that these things can't break stuff. So maybe that's just an important distinction.
Well, do MPIO hints or properties affect only the transfer of data, or do they affect the persistent storage?
They only affect the transfer of data.
Yeah, so I think that's an additional complication that HDF has to deal with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Because we kicked it around a few times, and the idea of twisting the defaults out from underneath the something gets to be a little tricky. Anyway.
We definitely want some easy way for users to set default per file or per application, but per file at least. And now you really like encoding for links, you set it per group.
Well, per link creation, actually.
Link creation, right, but then you use that in group creation. So it's too much, as we discussed. If someone uses old application with new defaults, it will be really painful.
So since everybody's mentioning users, in my world, a user is going to probably be someone that's running an application that just happens to be using HDF5, that they had no choice in the matter. It's, you know, they're running AL3D, they're running a simulation, and AL3D is using HDF5. And I suspect, number one, they are completely unaware of any of the knobs that may be available to them in various properties down in HDF5, nor are they willing to go look. And so the idea that users would somehow be doing something very, very, very unlikely. I could see the center, the computing center, perhaps having some input on maybe 1 or 2% of all the properties that are available down there. But the overwhelming majority of that is going to be from the people writing the application or the middleware IO libraries on top of HDF5.
Our concern came from
the change in default using different encoding, and also the thought of moving the default low bound on libvirt bounds to 1.8 as opposed to the current earliest.
Yes, so probably I should explain. So we have NetCDF community, NetCDF4, and H5 community that use UTF encoding. They were begging for many years to change default in HDF5 for names creation for links and attributes being in UTF-8. And we were thinking, okay, let's change the default in 1.12 that is coming. Then it turned out we need to change default for groups. They should be new style groups that were introduced in 1.8. But we still have applications that use 1.6 APIs and 1.6 style of groups. So people use, that's why we created compatibility macros that application written for 1.6 library will work with the new versions of the library seamlessly. But now we cannot do it without introducing, when we change defaults that those applications use, we don't give them, they have no means to switch back to their defaults. And this is where we start thinking, okay, we still will do it for 112 because 112 will tell them, yes, you cannot use it. But we need to find solution at some point they should be able to use it. And many of applications, as we know, may not be even, no, if they have to recompile, if they want to use, yeah. But minimum effort of updating will be really useful. This is where it came from.
I think this is a problem where they want their cake and they want to eat it too.
Yeah, I was going to ask, you know, what was driving them to request that HDF5 change their defaults?
I think because of the cost of constantly having to specify UTF-8 on each link creation.
Right.
But why don't they just create the property list and pass it in for each one? There's no constant need to do anything then.
Yeah, well, they have to modify their code to use it.
No, this is different. It's also, if you have HDF5 file that other application creates, when you read an H5 file that expects it to be in UTF-8, I don't know, they have to go through their Python things to do conversion, etc. And having it originally in UTF-8 will save them performance, and because they have to do something in their layer, Python layer.
Yeah, so that almost sounds like, okay, there are a bunch of people they want to support, they're using HDF5, but they're not using HDF5 the way they really want them to. And their only solution to that is to hope that the installation of HDF5 everywhere just magically does what they want it to.
Right.
She's asking a lot.
Yeah, to be honest, that does sound like a lot.
I don't know now, should we even change the default of this if we taking this position?
That's an argument.
If you're gonna switch away from maximum backward compatibility, it's definitely a big policy change.
Yep.
Quincy, I discussed it first with you and you agreed.
I think that the feature should be there, but I didn't know you were going to switch. The default would be to force a 1.10 or 1.12 even file format all the time.
You definitely knew. This is how we discussed it before you left. That we should bite a bullet and switch groups to new ones because of performance and UTF-8. But now I really, you know, having second thoughts if we need to do this, if we want to do this.
Well, in spite of my previous comments, I do think THG deserves the latitude to sort of decide, you know, how to move forward away from some of these. And if, I mean, look at Python 2 versus Python 3. I think Python 2 is sunsetting in 2020. There will be no further support for Python 2. And so similarly, I think it's fine if THG wants to make a choice that we're not so much that we're not going to support this anymore, but by default, it's not going to be what you get. And the reasons for this are many, and here they all are.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just a big change, and as long as we give people like some warning, that's fine. But I don't know that we have time to give them enough warning before 112 comes out. Otherwise, they're just going to say, well, that's crummy. I can't use 112, and I was planning on it for these other things. Whatever, you know, just warning.
When is 112? November?
No, it's July.
Oh, July.
Yeah. And frankly speaking, so we'll discuss it tomorrow again when we get together because.
Well, I second Quincy's opinion there. It seems like a massive change to give people only a month's heads up about.
Oh, well, they have heads up at least for 2 years if they were paying attention. So we definitely were talking about it. So now heads up will be we're not doing this. And we'll upset H5 Pi people tremendously, but I'm upsetting them so many times, so it does matter. But it's really, you know, for example, 1.8 style of groups, they I just showed slides to Eileen and John just before the meeting. Let me show you. So when they first came out, new styles of groups, I ran several benchmarks, and for example, that was benchmark. I still don't know how valid they are. We need to rerun, but time to open and read data set with new styles of groups, it was flat, while with number of groups, but with old style and 1.6 especially, performance was awful. The same was with time to close, and file size was tremendous when we use new groups and old groups. So there are many factors, if they're still valid, because as we know, we have drop in performance, but there is a good reason to switch defaults to use new style of groups.
So on the reduced access time, did the difference go away when you access the second data set in that particular group? It was
no, it was a random. I believe I need to check it was random data set that I was trying to, and with number of, it was flat file, so it was under each group there was one data set, and so essentially maybe it doesn't matter how many groups, it's how many data sets, and that was what was happening. More links you had in the group, then it slowed down just to find things.
Okay.
So am I correct in the following, is that the only reason not using your example here, Elena, the only reason not to use 1.8 new groups, the new groups, is that you will potentially generate data that another part of your workflow can't read because they are on a too old a version to digest that. Am I correct that that's the only reason not to use them?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a H5 repack command line that can be invoked to take a file from old groups to new groups?
New groups to old ones, no. Old groups to new ones, yes.
Okay.
And we will need to fix, so what we have H5 format, convert tool, right? That goes through groups and converts them, or it doesn't.
I don't know.
You guys did it?
I didn't do it. No.
When we did Swimmer, Quincy, it was you. When we did Swimmer, we were recreating metadata in place. So 1.8 can read the file.
Yeah, I thought that was only the B tree indices, or the chunk indices, not necessarily.
Yeah, but there is no reason we cannot update the tool to do the same thing, or to do convert back.
Well, old to new isn't as useful in that scenario, because I've generated something that part of my workflow can't digest, and I need to give the folks downstream of me some means of being able to digest it.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really, we're always struggling with forward compatibility. Backward compatibility is fine. So we always read whatever we created many years ago. But forward, when we change formats of basic objects, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah, that's the only reason why in many cases we have not done that, is we do have people on the older part of our workflow. And as long as we have lead time though, and by lead time I mean 6 months to a year for a lot of our software stacks to get updated, or at least know you guys are going to have to update in order to deal with our data that's going to be coming down the pike. I think that's a good rule of thumb. And we just haven't done it. But I think it's fine if THG says we're doing it, and you guys can sit there on old versions if you want to.
Well, I'm changing my mind every day, so depending how long I'm on the plane, have time to think. So here's what was my thinking is that first of all, I don't know if those benchmarks still hold. It's easy to check, but we have real problem anyway. This is even with using latest format. So 1.8 is. Okay, we have performance problems with old style of groups, which probably has nothing to do with the style of group. Reason is somewhere different. So we can tell people don't switch to 112 until we resolve performance issues anyway, and at that time we'll have better backward-forward compatibility for people who are still on old APIs. So we will not recommend, but we're releasing it with new defaults, so people can take advantage of other things, and like Python people can take advantage of it. But it's clear message what we are doing. But definitely it's work to do one way or another.
Well, we do have to clean up that performance issue.
So performance issue kind of dominate, and because people will not move to 112 because of performance issues anyway.
I guess I'm going to drop off.
Yeah.
I'll keep an eye out for the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So I guess it boils down, it's my decision, right? Okay, I have night today to before meeting tomorrow. So, Mark, before you joined, I was telling that we have now, we can set up clusters in cloud with OrangeFS, and we ran successfully MaxIO, IOR, and of course different versions of HDF5. So we're integrating it now in our daily performance test framework. And we can set pretty big clusters, depends how much we're willing to pay. But now we can test on regular basis, like with 1K processes right away it takes. So that's demo we wanted to show you at board meeting, maybe next time.
Oh, that sounds great.
And we set up GitLab here, so it's working here, and we're waiting. You probably, Mahesh updated you that they have to do something with accounts at OSTI and at NERSC. They're doing some upgrades, so we'll proceed there. So we're making progress.
Now I have to apologize on the NNSA contract front, the new NRE contract. Lee made it very clear to me that he wanted to develop the new statement of work, and he's since had a family, a death in the family, and that's occupied quite a bit of his time for the last several weeks. Yeah, I told him I'm happy to take that task from you, but no, he really wants to do it, and he assured me he actually was going to do it. And I've been reluctant to pester him a whole lot. I've pinged him about once a week just to see where he's at. So we're now woefully behind on that, and I apologize, but there's not a lot I can do.
No, it's okay, but we really rely on that because we're hiring. We found one very good candidate. We have another one, so we want to know when. It will be good for us to know when money will come.
Yeah,
so we can plan.
It should be in the range of about 380K, and I was hoping we'd have that SAL already, but we don't.